about these two youngsters? Rory McIlroy and Shane Lowry, back in the day, great friends through the years, going all the way back to 2007, European Amateur Team Championships. A couple of major champs themselves. Families are close. They practice together, hang out, live near one another in South Florida. Yeah, remember that a year ago. Ryder Cup teammates in Rome. You name it, they've done a lot together in this game. And for the first time, partners. World number 2 Rory making his tournament debut alongside Lowry, who will make his 5th start at the Zurich Classic. First round started tomorrow, 1:44 p.m. Eastern Time, alongside Colin Morikawa and partner Kurt Kitayama.
McIlroy spent his 4th consecutive week on the PGA Tour. There have been flashes of brilliance, but a lot of golf that even he would describe as just kind of okay. His best finish is 3rd at the Valero Texas Open, and a tie for 19th at the Players. Team McIlroy is with the media.
Rory, are you able to confirm whether or not you a potential return to the policy board?
Not as of yet, no.
Are we able to speak in hypotheticals?
Maybe.
I guess when you go back to a year ago or 8 months ago when you decided to step away, you talked about wanting to focus more on inside the ropes and things like that. I guess what has changed in the last 8 months, and kind of how do you look back now on that decision to walk away, and why, it might be interesting now?
I think I can be helpful. I don't think there's been much progress made in the last 8 months, and I was hopeful that there would be. And I think I could be helpful to the process, but only if people want me involved, I guess. So when Webb, and I talked, and he talked about potentially, coming off the board. I said, look, if it was something that other people wanted, I would gladly take that seat, and that was the conversation that we had. But yeah, I think that's the whole reason. I feel like I can be helpful. I feel like I care a lot, and I have some pretty good experience and good connections within the game and sort of around the wider sort of ecosystem and everything that's going on. So, but at the end of the day, it's not quite up to me to just come back on the board. There's a process that has to be followed, and but I'm willing to do it if that's what people want, I guess.
And unification has been your big thing the last few months. If hypothetically you were back, is that something you would then even have a stronger stance on the board?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I think it's the only way forward for the game of golf.
I mean, you've said before, I think, that maybe you didn't always see eye to eye with some people before on matters. How do you manage that, I guess, if you're back, in terms of trying to kind of steer things a certain way?
Compromise, but also, try to articulate your points as well as you can, and try to, help people see the benefits of what unification could do for the game and what it could do for this tour in particular. And we obviously realize the game is not unified right now for a reason, and there's still some hard feelings and things that need to be addressed. But I think at this point, for the good of the game, we all need to put those feelings aside and all move forward together. I would say that I played some of my best golf while being a PGA Tour board member, so I don't think it really hindered me, but it was maybe just taking away some time from me pursuing things or spending time doing things that I wanted to do at home, and having to hop on calls 2-3 times a week, and just the whole the whole thing started to take a toll, as it has on a lot of the players, right? Like we're golfers at the end of the day. We don't need to be trying to run a $15 billion business. We need to go out there and play golf and let the business people do the business things.
A report came out today that the equity numbers might be released to you guys today. I guess the question is, what's enough? What's a number that will make you guys feel validated for staying, considering the live payouts?
I think the one thing we've learned in golf over the last 2 years is there's never enough.
We're already talking equity, and as well as the future of the PGA Tour. And he may be right about that last question about, whether enough is enough. Is he enough? Coming back, this former PGA Tour staunch defender who walked away about 5 months ago, wanting to focus on his game. Will he be welcomed back, this player with the worldview and talking unification?
I suppose it depends who you ask. You'd think that since he is the biggest needle mover who's actually playing the tour these days, since Tiger really isn't, that there would be a lot of stakeholders who would want to see him back there. Fans, sponsors, certainly other people within the broader ecosystem of golf. But Rory McIlroy has also been urging a solution or a settlement of this civil war in golf that isn't necessarily a universally held opinion out there. And you can very clearly see that Rory's on a collision course potentially with other potential members of the board, other player directors. There's at least one player director has tried to delay any vote to put Rory McIlroy back on the board, based on the sources I've talked to today, that they kind of want to slow play this and follow a process. Well, there was no process applied when Tiger Woods was added to the board overnight. Tiger's literally the only person on the board who does not have a term limit on the board. He's essentially on the board for life unless it's dictated otherwise, because there's never actually been a term set for Tiger. So process is a useful weapon to apply at certain times whenever you want to use delay tactics at a board level, but it's not necessarily universally applied to all. And I think there's definitely a faction of player directors on the board who are not necessarily all that incentivized or enthused to move in the direction that Rory McIlroy is suggesting they move in. And there's a lot of issues behind that, and not the least of which is the idea of live players coming back, how they would move back into any kind of ecosystem. There are players who just simply want some kind of sanction applied to those guys, and there are other players who think that's just nonsensical and that the game has to move on from it. And those are two pretty powerful, distinct factions. Rory McIlroy is leading one of them, but that's not universally held among the other board members.
What about for Jay Monahan? I mean, at one time, Rory McIlroy was Jay Monahan's most powerful player lieutenant. You can make that argument. Does his worldview in talking unification jibe with the way Jay Monahan was talking, for example, at the Players' Championship, about this transformational time in our game and the importance of unification?
My sense is that the McIlroy view and the Monahan view are very much aligned, and there are others on the board who share a similar view. The question is whether or not Rory McIlroy coming back on the board can actually be effective. He did say he wants to be helpful, which is fine, but you can't presume that the reason there hasn't been progress is purely because of the PGA Tour. That the idea of getting some kind of claim on the time and attention of Yasser Al-Rumayyan, who serves on over 100 boards, is a recurring issue. Having decisions made by the PIF side in the negotiating room, I've also been told, is an issue. Who's authorised to make decisions on thorny issues? That's part of the reason why this process is dragging on as long as it is. So putting Rory McIlroy in the room, no matter how well thought of he is by anybody else in that negotiating room, it doesn't necessarily hasten a deal. I don't think it hurts, but it certainly doesn't hasten a deal, because it's not as though the PGA Tour boardroom is the sole reason why progress has lagged as long as it has.
There are many processes that are dragging on in the boardroom and in negotiations. Any part of you surprised that he would even consider going back on the board? Listen, when he left, he looked exhausted. I'll never forget an interview he did with Todd Lewis in Charlotte. Just everything just seemed like it was just too much. He had been such a staunch defender, surprised that June 6th. Stepped away, motivated briefly for a time, played great in Canada, and, had poke a little fun at Greg Norman when he, matched his number in PGA Tour wins, later surpassed him. But are you surprised, or does his worldview, curiosity, Renaissance man, having lived in the Middle East for 4 years, he wants to be in the room where it happens? Is that kind of almost part of his personality as well, the curious mind, the thoughtful Rory McIlroy?
To an extent. I also think there's an uncommon altruism there, this idea of what is actually good for the game, because ultimately whatever money is handed out in equity grants or anything else, it's always going to be a tiny slice of the net worth of Rory McIlroy. That's not necessarily true of other players. So I think he's potentially less hostage to the idea of some kind of sanction or some kind of benefit for him and sanction of his opponents over the last few years. So he probably has a cleaner worldview of where things should go. but it's not necessarily fully supported in the locker room. There's a lot of players who are disincentivized to see some kind of reunification, because these are guys who no longer have to beat John Rahm to win a golf tournament. A bonus that is coming to them that might otherwise have been going to a Brooks Koepka.
Right.
Or if you're in an opposite field event, you're not necessarily losing spots to guys coming back. There are a lot of undercurrents as to why players on the PGA Tour side, including at a board level, might not necessarily be incentivized to see some kind of unification. But ultimately what we're devolving into here, and this board issue is dangerously close to devolving into a schoolboy squabble right now. Nice work, boys, because fans are drifting away, sponsors are drifting away. This game is dangerously close to being broken, and they're going to start squabbling over a seat on the board. It's really not a good sign for anyone who thinks it's about time this game move forward.
So many differences of opinion, so many moving parts. We'll see if Rory has the vote should it come to pass and he find himself back on the board on the PGA Tour.